Hey everyone, Rye with STEM Mechanics, and today we're going to look at building a simple game in a JavaScript canvas. I'm using CodePen, and you can use CodePen too. You just go to codepen.io. You don't have to sign up for an account. In fact, I'm going to put the link to this pen that we're going to be using in the notes of the video, and you can open it straight up and just start working on it yourself. I want to show you what we're going to be doing when we run this game. We're going to have this dog image that's going to follow our mouse cursor around the canvas, and if it touches the bone is going to bounce to a different location on the screen randomly, and then we're going to increase the amount of bones that the dog has eaten from there. And we're going to jump right in because you probably know some programming if you're looking at this tutorial. If you've done some Scratch, if you've done some Python, if you've done some JavaScript, you will be able to jump right in here. So let's go. So in the pen that I've provided, I have gotten a little bit of setup code here for you that I'll explain once we get there. It's just a couple of URL sources that will work for the PNG files we're going to use for the dog and the bone. So in the HTML section, we're going to need to set up a canvas, and we're going to give that canvas an ID of, let's call it game canvas, and we're going to give it a width of, let's say, 300 and a height of 200. And we're going to say your browser does not support JS Canvas, just in case they have some JavaScript disabled on their browser that they're using. And in the CSS, I already went up and just selected for a canvas element and put the background color to light blue. Since it has an ID of game canvas, let me zoom in here for you. We could go ahead and select that even more uniquely as ID game canvas in the CSS to make that light blue. And then we'll jump over into the JavaScript here. So what have we got set up? Well, first of all, we're calling a add event listener on the DOM, on the document itself, listening for DOM content loaded. So that means that we want to wait until this canvas has been loaded onto the DOM for us to start using our code. And then I have two image sources, dog source and bone source, which if you copy just the URLs and paste it into your browser, you should see the image of the dog. So that image is being hosted in my Google Drive that I'm sharing access to that image, and the bone source is also in the Google Drive that I'm sharing publicly for this game. So I also have a collision function, which I've set up a little bit of the logic between the dimensions of the two objects that we want to collide, because it's beyond the scope of what we want to do today. So I'm just going to set that in there, but I will do a tutorial later on about colliding two objects. So now that we have some setup, let's go ahead and jump into the code. Just below the DOM content loaded add event listener, we're going to go ahead and cache the canvas, meaning we're going to save it into memory so the DOM can quickly access it by doing document.get element by ID, and we're going to pass the game canvas ID as a string, and then we're going to set up the context of the game. So the canvas API requires a context to draw the game, which usually is saved as a variable name called ctx, and then we're going to call the canvas that we just cached, and we're going to say get context, and we're going to pass in a string of 2D. The context is going to be 2D. There's other contexts we could use like WebGL, but we're going to stick with 2D for right now. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and set up the canvas border, which is going to be the canvas, and we're going to get it by its bounding client rect. So if we did a console log of canvas border and open our console, we will see that that returns an object of the canvas that holds all of its positioning. So it's X, which is its left side, its Y, which is its top, its width, and its height, which we set to 300 and 200. So we can use that for some simple math that we need to do in a minute. And if I go too fast at any point, feel free to pause the video, rewind, slow it down, freeze frame it, whatever you need to do. Comment out the console log, and then I'm going to go below the dog source image here, and we're going to start setting up the logic for our dog image. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do, variable of dog image, and we're going to set it to a new image object so that we can write that to the DOM later. And then we're going to take that dog image and we're going to make the source equal to the dog source variable that's storing the image URL. And then we're going to declare a dog X, which is going to be the starting X position on the canvas, which we'll say is 50, so 50 pixels from the left of the canvas. And we'll set up the dog Y, which we can also say is 50. And let's give the dog a height or a width. We can say 50 as well. And let's give the dog a height, which we can call 50 as well here. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to take the dog image and we're going to make it into a draw image method on the CTX API, and we're going to pass in the dog image as the first argument, and then we're going to pass in the dog X, the dog Y, the dog width, and the dog height in that order. And we need to make sure that we load in the dog first. So we're going to say dog image on load equals, and we're going to set that to a function. So now we can pass in the variables that we want, and there's the dog. So the dog will load when the dog image source is ready to show on the screen. So now let's do the same thing for the bone. So we're going to take the bone and we're going to set up a new bone image. That's going to be a new image object that we can write to the page. And then we're going to say bone image.source equals the bone source. And let's set up the X, Y, width, and height for the bone. So let's say bone X equals, and we'll say 100 to move it away from the dog a little bit when it first loads. And the bone Y, 100. And then the bone width, we'll do 80 because it's going to be wider than tall. And we'll do bone H equals, I'm at 40 for the width, and I'm at 80 for the height of the bone. And then we're going to do the bone image.onload equals function. And now we can go ahead and draw that bone just like we did with the dog. We'll pass the bone image that we created, and then we'll pass the bone X, the bone Y, the bone W, and the bone height. Okay, I had a little typo there. Now we see the dog and the bone. The bone's a little tall, so I'm going to lower the height down to 60 here. And that's all right. Looks okay. Make a little function for drawing this bone because we may need to use it later. So I will do something like function animate dog, and then I'm going to just move that draw image down into that function. And then here in the onload function, I'll call animate dog. And then I'll do the same thing. Oops, this should be bone. Animate bone. Animate bone. And then I'll do the same thing up here. I'll do function animate dog. And I'm going to move that down, and I'm just using Alt up and down keys to do that. And here I'm going to call animate dog. And so now we should still have the animations occurring here. I also want to set up a variable, a Boolean, that says something like bone is loaded. I'm going to set it to false when the page first loads, and then when the image onload is ready, we can set that to true, and then we can use that boolean later to do things when we want to animate on the canvas what's happening. And so we can do the same thing for the dog. Above the onload function here, we can do dog is loaded equals false, and then when the dog image is ready, we can set dog is loaded to true. So now our pictures are pretty much set up. So the next thing we should do is down towards the bottom, DOM content loaded event listener, right above the last closing brace and parenthesis. Let's start adding in a canvas add event listener. And the listener we're going to listen for is a mouse move. We're going to send an anonymous function, and we're going to pass in an E for an event, and then we can do let mouse x equal E dot client x. So the client x is the x position of the mouse on the event listener, and since the mouse event listener is going to take the x position on the entire screen, what we're going to do is we're going to subtract the x of the canvas. So we're going to subtract canvas border dot x. That way our mouse is at 0 on the left side of the canvas and not this little gap between the HTML body. So then we can say let mouse y equal E dot client y minus canvas border dot y, and that will get the top of the mouse. And then we can say dog x equals mouse x, dog y equals mouse y, and then if the bone and the dog are both loaded, so once those are true, so we can say if bone is loaded and dog is loaded, now we can start to animate and move them around. So now we can call animate dog and animate bone. And what we should notice here is if we now go over the page, the dog starts getting drawn all over the canvas, but the canvas keeps drawing over and over and over. So we're going to have to clear out that canvas by doing ctx.clear rect. And we're going to pass in the top left corner of the canvas, which is 0, 0, and then the width, which is canvas.width, and the height, which is canvas.height. So now the entire top left corner of the canvas to the bottom right corner of the canvas are being cleared out every single frame, or every single time the add event listener fires when I move the mouse. So now the dog is following the mouse pointer, and so what we want to do is start to have that collision when the dog hits the bone to move the bone around. So now we can do if, and now we can use this collision function that we have. So it has an x1, y1, width 1, height 1, x2, y2, width 2, height 2. So the two objects you want to collide, you pass in their parameters, their x, y, width, and height. And so in this case, we can do if dog x, dog y, dog width, dog height, bone x, bone y, bone width, and bone height. If those things collide, so I should say collide, of those things occurs, it will return true, in which case we now want the bone x to go somewhere else, and the bone y is going to go somewhere else. And the place we want it to go is to some random position. And we're going to start it off by doing math.floor, so that we get the floor of the random return. And then in the math.floor, we're going to call the math.random method, and we're going to multiply it by the canvas.width, so that we get a random number from something to the width, and we need to make sure that we subtract 1 from that, so that it moves it down to 0 and gets it to the canvas width. So then we're going to do math.floor, math.random times the canvas height, because now we're dealing with the y, and we're going to subtract 1 there. So now when the dog touches the bone bounces around, but here's the problem that we have, is that the bone jumps off the side of the screen edge of the canvas, but we want the bone to be shifted back to the left so that its right side doesn't go past the right side of the border. So what we can do here is in the bone X, we can go ahead and subtract the bone width from the canvas width. So that won't let the side of the right side of the bone go past the canvas. And then the same thing with the height. We can make sure that the canvas height subtracts the bone height. And now when we touch the bone, it shouldn't go beyond the boundary of the canvas. Right above the event listener, let bones eaten equal 0 to start. And then if the collision is true, when the bone moves, we can say bones eaten plus plus, which will increment the bones by 1. And since we have an incrementing variable and we want to show it to the user, we can go ahead and add some kind of HUD function, a heads-up display that writes onto the canvas. So we can say function update HUD, and that will do a ctx.fill text, and we'll pass in the text we want, which we can pass in as an interpolated string with a backtick, so that we can pass the bones eaten variable. So we can say dog ate, and then we can pass in bones eaten after the $ curly brace, and you can put in an exclamation point for excitement there. And then we can pass in the X and Y where we want the text to start. And above that, we could also set up the font style. So we can do font equals, and then in quotes, we can do something like bold, 20 pixels, Arial. And if I call update HUD right below that function, now it should write to the screen the first time. And then when I want to continuously update it, I'm going to have to go down here, update HUD right below animate bone. Now if the dog touches the bone, update the bone eaten variable. So that's about it. Pretty simple, but there's lots of things you can do with this type of method, and you can add in more objects for enemies or power-ups or whatever you want to do. Keep different variables that you can keep track of and make it your own game. So thanks for watching. I've been Rye at STEM Mechanics. See you in the next video.